Today, my guests are Superintendent Todd and the Supervisor of Federal Programs for Northwest Local Schools, Jenny Blust. Todd, Jenny, welcome to SuperChat. Todd, let me turn to you. In March of this year, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, known as CARES, was signed into law. Can you explain how this new law affects school funding?
Yeah, the department awarded these grants for the state educational agencies and emergency relief funds to basically address the impact of COVID-19 and what effect it had and continues to have on elementary and secondary schools across the nation. So that became the main reason for the funds being dispersed.
Well, why are these funds, these types of funds from the federal government needed so badly by school districts?
Well, they were really important to us because we had to purchase a lot of personal protective equipment, like PPEs. And so why they were important is our teachers would have a lot of interaction with our students because we decided to return in person. So if you think about starting with the youngest ones, our preschool kids who might keep their mask on, they might not. Our special education classrooms where the mask might stay on, they might not. We had to make sure our teachers were prepared to make sure they had masks that would cover them, had clothing that would cover them. You also have to take care of cleaning, cleaning desks, cleaning doorways, cleaning door handles, extra custodial supplies. We bought things that would fog classrooms and fog the buses because on buses, the students were the closest to each other that they would be at any time during the day because you didn't have a lot of space to separate them. We had to have extra custodians to help clean. We decided to pilot a summer school program, so we needed that. We had to have isolation rooms because you had to watch for symptoms as you came into school. So once you came into school and you displayed any symptoms, you had to go to an isolation room. And so you had to have that room decided where to be in each of the buildings. And you had to have somebody to run that room. So that person had to be hired. So that was a big deal. We had to have Zoom license because we offered in-person or virtual learning. So you had to purchase Zoom license so you could do virtual instruction. You needed a contact tracer because not only was we responsible for being notified about someone with COVID, but then we had to trace who they were next to, who were you within 6 feet for a 15-minute period throughout the day. So that took a lot of time. And then we had to look at how many people went remote. We had to end up hiring some additional teachers for the middle school because our remote caseload got too high. And then needing Chromebooks and Wi-Fi and student support. So all of this money allowed us to provide in-person learning, allowed us to transport kids to school, allowed us to feed kids extra meals that they did not have access to. And without these extra funds, we could not have opened school or provided remote learning. So it was all very much needed.
You know, when you lay out the details of all these implications and everything that it covers, which were really not normal in terms of a line item expense in your budget, it's easy to see that kind of answers the question quite well, actually, that I asked you. But it's just phenomenal how all this must add up. Well, will any of this new funding go towards salaries and bonuses for existing staff members?
It's very specific on what you can do with it. And the one thing that it cannot go to is for negotiations and salaries and bonuses. So the funding cannot be used to pay for salaries unless they are being used to pay for things like summer school, extending the school day, tutoring after hours. It cannot be used to provide raises to contract negotiations, but however, it can be helped to provide services for the students that will help with anything that has to do with makeup learning or catch-up learning, since students have been on remote learning since last March. And that was the biggest part of it. The governor, when he first came out, wanted plans in place that how do you extend the school year? How do you extend the school day? What's going to happen over the summer? We can add additional staff to our schools, but only for the length of time that the money is allowed to be used. So when you look at the current ESSER funds, most of them last for 2 years. And so if we hire any additional staff, whether it be certified or classified, it can only be for the 2 years. So at the end of the 2 years, we can no longer offer these employees contracts as the funds will run out. So we're trying to put together the best practices that directly affect our Tier 1 instruction, and that is the instruction that is occurring inside the classroom for every child and benefits every child. That's our regular ed students, our students with disabilities, every child that is sitting in that classroom. And so we have to change our instruction. The quality of teaching is going on in the classroom, and provide professional development, provide assistance in the classroom. And that's what the true use of the ESSER funds are. So there's been some misunderstanding through public interpretation and others that folks are going to use these funds to pad teacher salaries and so on and so forth. You're not allowed to do that. The true use is, how do you help create make-up learning, because not everybody has gotten the same out of remote learning. And it goes back to last March. We were shut down. You weren't allowed to do in-person learning. So from March till June, everybody was removed from school. And then coming back this year, parents were given the option to choose in-person or remote. And even though they were doing remote, not all participated equally. So we've got some make-up learning to do. Some kids did thrive, though. They did great through remote learning, and our kids did great with in-person learning. But there's still some support systems we need to put in place. Think about the social emotional learning that's been lost. So we've got to work on that part. But that's what this funding is for. So adding additional staff, changing some supports, putting some things in that will help them.
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope we are turning the corner on all of this. It has been an extraordinary year and a half. Well, excellent. Fantastic information, Todd. Well, Jenny, let me turn to you. It's my understanding that CARES Act funding is spread out over 3 main areas. What can you tell our listeners about the allocation of these funds?
So when the CARES Act funding was put in place in March and April of last year, there were several acts that gave us funds. It was kind of classified in 3 areas. We have the elementary and secondary school emergency funds, which are called ESSER funds. The Corona Relief Fund, which is called the CRF. And then the Broadband Ohio Connectivity Grants. It really gets confusing when you start to look at the individual funding sources, because some of them are directed solely to schools, and others include many organizations in the community, including schools. So this results in many applications and funds from which money can be drawn, as well as many different deadlines for using the funds. So it really requires the district to be strategic about how each fund is used and when we need to use them by. So the first money was the ESSER 1, and that was money that was allocated to schools. The funding was made available for 2 years, and it required equitable participation amounts for non-public schools in our area. The second was the Coronavirus Relief Fund. That was made available to a variety of different organizations, and the uses of funds for schools mirrored the allowable uses under ESSER. So some organizations offered additional subgrants to schools in order to utilize their CRF funds. So for example, Hamilton County offered a portion of their funds to the Northwest Local School District, and then that allowed us to cover some expenses that we had incurred that were not covered originally with our grant. The third one was the broadband grant. That was made available to schools in the fall of 2020. And this grant was designed to help schools provide home internet services to eligible families and in common areas. So both the Corona Relief Fund and the broadband grant were originally slated to expire in December of 2020. However, there was this last minute extension granted that extended the availability of these funds through December of 2021. So then most recently, you've heard since January, new funding has been approved. So we're kind of classifying that as ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 allocations that are going to be received directly to the schools.
Mm-hmm. When are schools expected to receive these funds?
So these funds have already been available to us. Many of the first rounds of funds actually are already spent and received by the district. The only funds that we're still awaiting access to are the ESSER 3. So ESSER 2, the application is out. The district we're in the process of applying for those funds and we can start spending them. Any of the costs that have been incurred since March of last year can be attributed to these funds.
Mm-hmm. Have you been able to identify specifically how you plan to use any of these funds?
I think that Todd covered a lot of that in his first question, the kinds of things that we have used the funds on.
So it's a continuation, really, of supporting a lot of those things that need to happen, right?
Yes, exactly. We meet weekly. Our administrative team meets weekly to discuss these funds and how they can help us continue to stay focused on our strategic plan, despite those challenges, all those unique challenges we've faced over the past 12 months. In between these meetings, we're collecting information from our community, our parents, our students about the needs of our district and the schools. We use all of this information to make our decisions. And during these decisions and discussions, we're always focused on these questions. Will the funds prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus? Is it an allowable use of funds for CARES? Is it reasonable or necessary? Does it promote equity? And does it support us returning our students to the classroom?
Those are all excellent criteria. And the fact that you're meeting weekly keeps everything current and everybody's on the same page. Well, do you expect that this funding is something that will continually be given and supplied to school districts?
No, that's what makes it so challenging. These have been identified as one-time funds. So while there have been many legislative acts that have provided funds to districts and to schools, there is absolutely no expectation that any of these funds will continue to be allocated to districts in the future. So we really have to be strategic in how we use these funds and really make sure that any initiatives that we put in place are only needed for 2 years or that they're sustainable when the funds are no longer available.
Well, I must say, this has been a topic on the minds of, well, many citizens around the country and certainly within your school district. It will be interesting indeed to see how everything unfolds as we go forward. Good job today, guys. Excellent report. And I want to thank you both for joining me today here on SuperChat.
Yeah, we appreciate it, Gary. We just don't want folks to see job postings going out and having a misunderstanding that these funds are coming from our general fund. These are funds that are coming from the federal government with the entire sole purpose of assisting our students recovering from learning that was lost due to the pandemic and doing our best to make sure that our students recover what learning was lost. So we appreciate the opportunity, as always, to speak with you and be transparent with our community.